Thank you very much, and thank you for having us today to talk about this important issue. I'm joined by several very experienced and expert panelists that we will get to in just a second. I wanted to give a brief background summary of the FCC action, and then we will kick it off with our panelists. So as has been mentioned, in November of 2020, the FCC voted 5-0 to move forward with a reallocation of the lower 45 megahertz of the 5.9 gigahertz band. This would include reserving the upper 30 megahertz for vehicle to everything technology services. And additionally, we have seen that the my apologies for the small children in the background. That has now been taken care of. It's a little distracting for me. So the FCC voted in November to move forward with reallocation. The lower 45 megahertz would be reallocated for unlicensed devices, while the upper 30 megahertz would be reserved for V2X technologies. Additionally, the FCC has given Dsrc incumbent licensees operating in the lower 45 megahertz 1 year from the effective date to transition to the upper 30, and has required that all V2X technologies transition to CV2X and proposed a 2-year transition period. So this rulemaking, or this decision in November to move forward, followed a lengthy comment notice and reply comment process that ITS America, along with many other transportation stakeholders, participated in. This included over 85% of submitted comments to the record opposing the FCC's action. However, the FCC decided to move forward. We have not yet seen publication in the Federal Register of the FCC final report and order and further notice of proposed rulemaking. However, we have expected to see it, and we still anticipate that the FCC is moving forward despite the delay. We have seen a few encouraging signs recently. The House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee Chair, Peter DeFazio, wrote a letter to the FCC expressing his concern regarding the reallocation of the lower 45. Additionally, we've seen statements from officials at USDOT, from the Biden administration in support of V2X and the 5.9 gigahertz band. Today, we're joined by 4 panelists who are very involved in the development and deployment of V2X technologies and the use of the 5.9 gigahertz band. This includes Shaylin Batt, President and CEO of ITS America, Ken Leonard, the Director of the Intelligent Transportation Systems Joint Program Office, or ITS-JPO at USDOT, Sue Bai, Chief Engineer in the Automobile Technology Research Division of Honda R&D Americas, and Jim Meisner, Senior Director of Product Development Management and the Global CV2X Ecosystem Lead for Qualcomm. I will introduce each of our panelists this morning before their respective presentations. And with that, I will turn to our first panelist, Shaylin Batt. Shaylin is the President and CEO of the Intelligent Transportation Society of America. In this role, he promotes policies that advance the development and deployment of intelligent transportation technologies throughout the United States. He has testified before Congress about the positive safety impact of intelligent transportation technologies, including connected and automated vehicles. Shaylin is a leading voice in transportation on technology's ability to save lives and reduce crashes on U.S. roadways. Prior to his current role, Shaylin served as the Executive Director for the Colorado Department of Transportation, as Cabinet Secretary for the Delaware Department of Transportation, and at the U.S. Department of Transportation under President Obama. Shaylin?
Thank you, Tim. And just full disclosure for everybody who's tuned in today, Tim does work for ITS America. So if you hear him say things like, wow, Shaylin, what a great statement, or wow, so insightful, he does get a bonus for every time he's able to praise me during these presentations. And Tim had his kids crashing in. I'm actually on my first day of vacation, so I could have kids or in-laws walking through here. So apologies in advance. You know, it's so inspiring to have conversations like these, and also so challenging at the same time, because today we're talking about how do we, you know, preserve something that is so integral from our perspective to road safety at a time when a lot of the discussion is about how does it get carved up and divided. And so we have been engaging with our allies in the administration, Congress, and many of our partner organizations to mount a defense of preserving the 5.9 safety spectrum for transportation. And I think that from a safety perspective, as a former state DOT director for the Colorado DOT and for Delaware, I was felt personally responsible anytime there was a fatality on the system. And so I think that, you know, today in this environment where we're looking at, you know, fatalities and rates that have gone up over the past year, even though traffic has come down, when we're looking at vulnerable road users on the system being killed in unprecedented numbers, and if you start to think about this larger conversation around environmental impacts of transportation, you know, I used to chair the National Operations Center, and we know that about 55% of traffic congestion just comes from non-recurring incidents, so there are crashes on the system. So, you know, when you look at sort of like a triple bottom line, if you can improve connectivity for vehicles, you can reduce fatalities. And, you know, we've been saying towards zero deaths for a long time in transportation. 10 years ago, when I was an appointee at US DOT, we're like, let's get towards zero deaths. And we actually went the other way. And so I think it's the best of times and the worst of times. I think the technology is finally at a point now where you get, where we're able to look at deployment, where you're actually now starting to think about connectivity. And the V2X part is incredibly important, right? It's not just connecting vehicles to other vehicles, although that is critical. It's connecting vehicles to pedestrians and to other vulnerable road users. It's connecting to infrastructure, and it's paving the way. You know, Congressman Lada spoke a lot about international competitiveness. You know, if we want to be able to show the world that we are serious about technology and transportation, we have to be moving forward. So, you know, at the same time that we've been trying to preserve all 75, because I think that is our ideal, you know, scenario, because we have grave concerns about interference with unlicensed devices in the lower 45. And I want to be clear. I mean, ITS America has been saying for a number of years now that we're open to sharing the 75, the full 75, in terms of the safety spectrum, because we understand that there are needs for, you know, broadband in rural areas and other deployments. What we have always said is, let's ensure that we don't allow there to be leakage, so that the safety messages get any kind of interference. And so we have been working at the same time externally to preserve the full 75. We've been working internally to study which V2X messages and applications would be able to function in a 30 megahertz environment. And these efforts have been led by ITS America's Future of V2X Working Group, which is comprised of OEMs, infrastructure owner-operators, and V2X technology companies. And we've developed a preliminary 30 megahertz application map, which demonstrates that limited V2X applications would be able to function in 30 megahertz, but a number of important safety tools would likely be lost, including advanced vehicle to pedestrian applications and collective perception messages. So most recently, Jim Timon of AASHTO and I wrote a letter to Secretary Buttigieg of DOT, Secretary Raimondo of Commerce, and NEC Director Deese, asking them to submit a proposal to Congress preserving the full 75 megahertz of spectrum within the 5.9 band, and to work with the FCC to ensure that all spectrum allocated for V2X services is protected from harmful interference. Now, we plan to continue to engage with the White House on this issue. We've got about 50 stakeholder organizations that we're working with right now. We've been participating in regular meetings on the Hill, as well as recently meeting with staff from relevant congressional committees. So, you know, I'm sure many of you saw that Transportation and Infrastructure Chairman Peter DeFazio sent a letter to the FCC reiterating his strong opposition to their proposed reallocation. Very grateful to see this letter, as well as when the Chairman DeFazio brought this issue up in Secretary Buttigieg's recent hearing. And while we're laser focused on the safety impacts, I do think that we also want to consider the environmental implications. I think that when we hear about the Build Back Better plan, it's about how do you reduce fatalities, but also reduce the environmental impact of transportation. And I think we're all, or we should all be aware that about 29% of total US greenhouse gas emissions come from transportation. And in 2017, congestion caused Americans to use an extra 3.3 billion gallons of fuel. And so USDOT has found that V2X technologies can provide significant environmental benefits, including a 22% fuel savings through signal operations and freeway lane management, and a 20% reduction in vehicle miles traveled through low emission zone applications. And so, I think it just makes sense that if we can reduce congestion, reduce crashes, we're going to use less fuel. And then from an equity perspective, because I think that's the other big word that we're all talking about now, I think that it's important to understand that pedestrian traffic fatalities have increased by 51% from 2009 to 2019, and now account for about 20% of all traffic deaths. And if you look at cycling fatalities, they've increased by 36% since 2010. So we're asking people to do things like get out of your car, bicycle, use these other forms of transportation, such as walking, scootering. I don't know if scootering is actually a verb, but I just made that up. It's a mobility on demand thing. But we know that fatality rates for cyclists in Black and brown neighborhoods are 20 to 30% higher. And so, whether it's deployment of intelligent intersections or V2X technologies, tying it all together, we know we can make a significant impact. And so there are a lot of partner stakeholders on this call. And so whether it's our work with the Department of Energy and some of their work around mobility, that they've done a lot of exciting stuff that views V2X as critical to their success, whether it's working with many of the safety organizations and equity organizations. The time is now to really push forward and to raise all our voices, both to preserve 75 and to make sure that the 30, if that's what we end up with, is able to be used. So I will stick around and really excited to hear from our other partners as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shaylin, for that excellent overview of why V2X and the safety spectrum is so important, and some of the efforts the transportation stakeholder community is undertaking now in an effort to preserve it. Next, we're going to turn to Ken Leonard with USDOT. Ken has over 30 years of leadership experience in the research, development, and deployment of advanced technologies. He is the Director of Intelligent Transportation Systems at USDOT, where he works to advance a portfolio of programs designed to transform the way society moves. These include connected and automated vehicles, smart cities, accessible transportation, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and other cutting-edge transportation systems designed to increase the safety and productivity of the nation's transportation system. Ken is particularly involved in USDOT's efforts related to V2X technologies and the 5.9 gigahertz safety spectrum band. I think we're very lucky to have him with us here today. Ken?
Tim, thanks very much, and it's a pleasure to be here. And yes, since I joined the ITS Joint Program Office, I got a phone call shortly after accepting the position, and the Assistant Secretary said, "Oh, by the way, there's this one little issue you need to know about on spectrum," and so that was the start of my involvement. And let me just say that the department continues to strongly believe in the potential of V2X technology, its ability to save lives, improve mobility, and have many beneficial effects on our infrastructure, our economy, and our society. It's critical that we have adequate spectrum for this purpose. And even though the FCC proceedings are ongoing, we're committed to working with FCC, NTIA, and other stakeholders in a collaborative way to determine a workable long-term solution. And I think our secretary and our deputy secretary nominee have said that pretty clearly in their public statements. So, one of my favorite quotes, Winston Churchill's reported to have once said, "Americans can always be trusted to do the right thing once all other possibilities have been exhausted." And I think we're in the middle game right now of proving Mr. Churchill right once again. The USD has conducted over a decade of research, demonstrations, real-world deployments in the 5.9 gigahertz safety band. We've demonstrated proven technology that can reduce crashes, save lives, increase mobility, reduce emissions. We've achieved globally harmonized standards and spectrum. We reached a general industry consensus towards a V2X mandate, even widely supported by the industry that was going to be regulated. And that's when we got Churchillian. We began to explore as a country all the other possibilities. And it's been mentioned already. Last November, the FCC voted to ban Dsrc, a deployed and proven technology in the 5.9 band, take away 60% of the spectrum, impose LTE 4G, a less mature technology in the remaining 30 megahertz. They immediately froze pending deployment licenses by state and local applicants, now numbering over 700. And perhaps soon, the FCC will issue a final report and order that starts a 30 to 60 day clock that could allow unlicensed devices into the spectrum being used in Michigan and 27 states around the nation that could cause irreversible harm and interference. To put it simply, abandoning the established safety band plan is a mistake, and it's a life-threatening mistake. Those 75 megahertz are the foundation of life-saving, short-range collision avoidance technology that DOT believes is ready for wide-scale national deployment. This issue is urgent. Safety of life and the future of surface transportation innovation requires an immediate stay and reversal of the FCC actions in the pending report and order on 5.9. 90% of the commenters on the report and order opposed it. And just last week, the NTSB issued their most wanted list, recommending that collision avoidance and connected vehicle technologies be required on all vehicles. And the National Transportation Board specifically highlighted the FCC action, quoting here, we're alarmed by the recent regulatory decision by the Federal Communications Commission to substantially shrink the communication spectrum dedicated to connected vehicle technology. They went on, if this decision is not reversed, safety progress could be hindered, end of quote. So let me be clear, without rescinding the FCC final report and order, within 30 to 60 days, irreparable harm can begin to happen to the safety band, to DOT's mission, to the public interest of virtually everyone who uses or benefits from the transportation system. The DOT would like to see a positive resolution to the 5.9 issue and save the safety band. DOT is interested in working with federal, state, and industry colleagues to coalesce the stakeholder communities around a single, effective, affordable, available, efficient, and interoperable solution and deploy it in existing and new vehicles and infrastructure. So here's what it boils down to. ITS technology and the safety band, if deployed now, can reduce crashes, save lives, increase mobility and efficiency. To achieve that, we need good public policy, good governance, and paying attention to the science and the facts. And those facts tell us that connected vehicles are proven and validated. They've been tested, demonstrated, and proven. They're ready for deployment. They work, and you can bet your life on them. It's imperative that we act now to stop the FCC's mistake and set up the foundation of safety innovation and transportation and accelerate the goal of achieving zero deaths, not slow it down with this action. So let's do the right thing. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you, Ken. And now we will turn to Sue Bai. Sue is Chief Engineer in the Automobile Technology Research Division of Honda R&D Americas. Sue's areas of research include wireless communication for in-vehicle navigation systems, telematics system design and development, and connected and automated vehicle system research. She currently leads a team that supports Honda's transportation safety and mobility goals through connected vehicle and V2X communication systems. Sue has held leading roles on SAE V2X technology standards committees for many years, working to improve safety and mobility for a variety of road users, including vehicles, pedestrians, cyclists, and road workers. She is also the Honda technical leader for various industry government collaborative projects, including the Ohio Smart Mobility Corridor, that when fully operational will be the longest stretch of continuously connected highway in the world. Sue?
Thank you. Well, I'm glad that I dialed in earlier to listen to a Congressman led us a speech about how important it is, even from the federal government side, on establishing a nationwide policy for a connected, automated vehicle and transportation system. We work very closely with Ohio DOT, and I'm very thankful that Ken mentioned about the time that the essential timing of deploying such technology for saving life today instead of another 5 years of research. So when we discussed with Ohio DOT and other regional partners such as Union County, City of Marysville, Dublin, we talked about the decade question of a chicken and egg, who goes first. We decided we all become chickens. There's no eggs anymore. Let's move together. And as we move together, the smart mobility corridor will be probably the world's longest fully connected environment for not only pilot deployment, but could also open to production level of validation. And now the FCC rule puts this project in jeopardy. The Ohio DOT and other government agencies' device cannot transmit. And we have implemented hundreds of vehicles using Honda Associates personal use vehicles retrofitted with technology ready to show the world this is the dream environment with a high density in day one that nowhere else in the world you can experience, because we're using the commuting traffic to build a future environment that you may see 5-10 years down the road, but you get to see that today. Now the FCC decision is severely hindering this deployment. And of course, the safety and the mobility benefit coming with it also is being delayed. And I also remember Congressman Lattice's words about the homegrown technology. Dsrc is homegrown. It's been validated, as Ken mentioned. It's been researched for decades and it's ready to go. It is just very unfortunate that we see FCC could make such a decision, probably lack of a careful thoughts on how mature the technology can be and how much life are on the line. And I also would like to add the pedestrian and vulnerable road user safety aspect of the V2X. Honda led the vehicle to vulnerable road user communication safety research. And since 2013, we have made a tremendous progress and led the world first standardized message set to enable such communication from a smartphone or cyclist mobile device to vehicles to increase the awareness of a vulnerable road user around vehicles. And as Ken and I think Shannon also mentioned, that the pedestrian and vulnerable road user fatality and injury rate is on the rise. We're sitting on the technology, matured, ready to go, and that the spectrum situation is very troublesome.
Thank you, Sue. And now we will turn to our final panelist, Jim Meisner. Jim is Senior Director, Product Management and Global C-V2X Ecosystem Lead for Qualcomm. He develops and executes Qualcomm's C-V2X deployment strategy across all global regions and works with roadside and automotive stakeholders, enabling software, hardware, stack suppliers, and internal teams to accomplish broad C-V2X deployment. Previously at Qualcomm, Jim led the automotive standards team, and C-V2X was a major emphasis there as well. In addition to his roles at Qualcomm, Jim serves as a 5GAA board member, ITS California board member, the SAE V2X Technical Committee Chair, and is active in several roles at the Transportation Research Board. We don't have time today to go over all of Jim's past positions related to connected vehicle technology, but suffice it to say, Jim has been working on vehicle highway automation and vehicle safety communication for decades and brings significant experience and expertise to our discussion today. Jim?
Thank you, Tim, and thank you for aging me. Happy to be here. I am going to talk a lot about V2X, and this is where I strike a resonant chord with the other panelists. Realize very exquisitely the safety of life benefits of V2X, and as the other panelists dearly want to see it deployed sooner, not later. I bring a couple of observations from these experiences. For example, on the safety pilot done in Michigan, I was the quality control PI when I worked at a consulting firm. And I knew what we were doing in that we collectively, the industry, was looking at the algorithms, looking at how the algorithms would work, the application protocols. So when we started this CV2X journey, we kept those application protocols sacrosanct. Not realizing at the start of the journey, however, that there would be spectrum loss in the US, or potential spectrum loss. I understand, and we support using all 75 megahertz. Why do we support using all 75 megahertz? Because, and I can explain during the Q&A, certainly, how we use 20 megahertz, one radio, as part of the telematics control unit, that is the modem that you see in the car, to deliver a whole host of safety services. Because CV2X, we liken it to a new technology, yes, or some earlier speaker likened it to an old technology, but it's a more modern radio and it's a different type of mechanism to get air access. So you can, with one radio, not multi-channel operations, deliver today's safety services. And there's work done within SAE to instantiate that. Another thing we see in CV2X is that great potential promise, though, and some of it is lost by loss of spectrum, because we had hoped that the 5G variant would be supplemental to that. And we see great strides and potential in other global regions, but not necessarily in North America. We should join together in working to make that happen. One thing we also see in CV2X, and we at Qualcomm, in fact, when I started at Qualcomm, we worked with Sue's team on protocols for V2X or V2P, is we see, although there's no guarantee and it's a difficult road, and we're working that road for vulnerable road user protection, that is CV2X transceivers, which would be in commercial devices, because there's a better chance of that. There is a way to basically use the very same chipset that you use for LTE communications for VRU, and we are working quite hard at trying to make that happen. And again, it's not easy, it's not trivial. There are a lot of concerns, but suffice it to say that VRU protection is something that we view as perhaps the next great thing to do with today's application. So in sum, we view CV2X as an important evolution, and the evolution that would, once we see the LTE variant, which was referred to earlier, instantiated in cars within the first 20 or 30 megahertz, that could be available, that is lemonade when you have a lemon. We do wish that the industry would work together to get step B done, which would be to find or use the entire 75 megahertz of the safety band for the additional applications that are offered. So that I turn this over to Tim and for moderation for subsequent discussion.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you to all of our panelists for your presentations today. I would encourage folks participating or watching to submit questions through the Q&A box. But I'm going to start us off, and this question is really to all four panelists, but I want to start with Ken Leonard. So I'm going to come to you first, Ken. In your view, what impact does reducing the spectrum for V2X down to 30 megahertz have on the future of transportation safety, and which V2X services are available? And how will such a limited spectrum environment impact both the near-term and long-term V2X deployment from whatever perspective you bring to the table? And Ken, that of course is as the regulator for you.
Sure, and understand that the ITS Joint Program Office is not a regulator, but DOT has regulatory authorities. And I would say that we're already seeing an impact and have been seeing impacts of the FCC's action. But let me start with something that I think probably all of the panelists here agree. And I think we all agree that 30 megahertz is not enough to perform all of the V2X services and applications that have been developed, that have been demonstrated by OEMs, private industry, state and local departments of transportation. And it's simply a matter of physics. This is one of those times where we got to go back to the science and talk about why that won't work. And we could probably spend the rest of the hour talking about that, but I don't think that's what we want to do. We've got studies and there are working groups, for example, that have identified the applications that are lost at 30 megahertz. And they're safety critical things, intersection collision warnings, pedestrian safety, which we've all talked about as a growing area. Intersection movement assist, railroad crossings. There's just a whole host, wrong way drivers. We've demonstrated that in Tampa. All of these applications are potentially at risk as you try and jam fewer and fewer applications and safety messages into too small a bandwidth that, by its very nature, is already being interfered upon. So I'll stop there. And
thank you, Ken and Sue. I wanted to ask you as well, in the work that you're doing deploying V2X technologies in Ohio, how do you see the potential reallocation and reduction of spectrum impacting that deployment?
Well, the current deployment, we only have the Honda vehicle side. We're waiting for the infrastructure side to be online. Unfortunately, the licensing is being held at FCC, and the Ohio DOT is also struggling with it. Coming back to the spectrum allocation, when Honda led the vulnerable road user safety application research and standardization, we have SAE as an industry and stakeholder community decided to use a channel 176, which is a separate channel from the B2B traffic on 172 to transmit vulnerable road user safety message. And the reason is there's a saturation of a channel when there are too many vehicles in one channel, such as a congested multi-stack interchange situation, versus the pedestrian safety. To guarantee that function and the quality of the communication, we need separate channels. So that's one of the first separate channel that has dedicated use, aside from the B2B that the research work has started much earlier. And moving on from that, we also defined other channels for infrastructure. For example, for emergency vehicles to have a higher transmission power to tell other travelers on the road to yield the way, or communicate with the traffic signal controllers to give green light to emergency vehicles that may be traveling at a higher speed. And that separate channel would be a great use to guarantee that kind of safety that save people's life to bring patients to the hospital 5 minutes earlier than sitting in traffic. And another even more going into the future is at SAE, I lead a vehicle application committee that developing probably the US first connected vehicle control oriented application standards to enable cooperative automation. This has both safety and mobility benefit, as Congressman Latta and Ken and Shaylin all mentioned, that this also needs a separate channel because of the control nature of that application. It has even higher sensitivity on the robustness. If it's mixed with a vehicle, the regular V2B communication traffic, that may hinder both sides of the B2B safety and control-oriented applications. So we already have several applications that needs dedicated channel. To take 45 off away from 75 is just, it's damaging to the V2X deployment, not only to the current safety applications, but also to the future applications. I really have trouble that understanding how US can lead this connected automation technology moving forward in the world when we're lacking spectrum to do that.
Thank you, Sue. And Jim, I wanted to bring you in on this conversation as well. I think your position at Qualcomm and your work with V2X provides you a unique perspective here, as the reallocation is coupled with a move towards C-V2X. But I would note that there is, of course, a transition timeline and still a process by which C-V2X would need to be approved. So I didn't, if you wanted to comment on this.
Sure, and I'd like to bring a little bit of science into this discussion too. The science and the real concern, actually the real concern is loss of spectrum. We can all agree on that. But taking this one step at a time, if that loss of spectrum were to occur, how can we prevent harmful interference? So as we expect the FNPRM, which will happen at the same time with the publication report order, that as the clock starts, we'll have proposals that would have unlicensed access points, unlicensed Wi-Fi access points to be outdoors. That would cause, in all likelihood, harmful interference, depending on some rules that would be applied, those emission limits. So yes, certainly we should fight on all fronts, but this is a front that we have to be mindful of. Second scientific point is that 3GPP, again, a multi-SDO international organization, not a made in America versus non-made in America. I assure you there are plenty of American inventiveness within 3GPP protocols. It's different than Dsrc, so we have to get out of this mindset of channelization. What there is something called a prose per packet priority. This rolls off the tongue. It's PPPP. You can all remember that. Which allows prioritization, just as it says, to happen with certain applications. So any local application, say that you want to do SRM, SSM, your transit property, you can have those applications work within a locally defined prioritization scheme. And the committee that I'm leading, an SAE, the C-V2X technical committee, has J3161, which is past ballot. It's in comment resolution, which has described how we can do the best we can with 20 megahertz. Now, it's not the greatest. It happens to work fine for deployments in China, talking about the international aspect of it. So there are ways, and I do encourage others to examine those ways. You know, again, that perhaps a tired metaphor, but it's the lemonade metaphor. And let me tell you the good part about what makes the lemonade taste a little bit better is that it's more likely for an OEM. In fact, one has announced in the US, and I believe 10 have announced in China. And there are other global regions, and certainly part of my job, we're working on this, is one radio, and it's in the LTE modem in your car that would allow at least the radio access part of this to work. So not two radios, which is how you do with multiple channels or more, and a protocol that hasn't been proven to work, at least in terms of adjacent high traffic channels. So again, keep an open mind with what the technologies could or should be, and then unite certainly in trying to find more spectrum, so that there are some points of agreement that I do have certainly with the rest of this distinguished panel.
Thank you, Jim. And turning to you, Shaylin, thinking about the reallocation, and we at ITS America, of course, have member stakeholders from across the industry. What do you see as the real impact on transportation safety, on V2X deployment, and really the importance of not moving forward with reallocation?
Yeah, I think our challenge is we're making a technical argument, and quite frankly, there's just when we say things like let's rely on the science, it makes so much sense to us who are sort of grounded in this, but for others, particularly when it comes to safety, when people go to buy cars, they don't buy cars for safety, except for me because I have 2 young daughters, but a lot of other folks are, there's just a lot of other features. And so, I think what is frustrating to me, I think this whole last year plus now of a global pandemic where we focused on 500,000 Americans, being killed by a virus, and at the same time, we're projecting if you have 40,000 fatalities on American roadways last year, that's 400,000, fatalities of Americans over the next decade, not to count all the serious injuries. And so I feel like it is just really just frustrating to me that you have every state DOT, you have dozens of these safety organizations, you have the NTSB, you have US DOT, all united in a single voice. You have law enforcement all saying, don't do this thing. And I think Sue said it really well. How can the US be a global leader in connected autonomous vehicles when we don't have spectrum? And so to me, I think that, Ken started out by quoting Winston Churchill. And if you look at history, there are all sorts of things that have occurred where you're like, wow, that I can't believe they made that choice. And then you can see all of these things that cascade from that. And I think that looking back, if we're unable to, stem the tide with the FCC here, I think folks will point back to the point where this was a position where the US lost its leadership position in global competitiveness around connected and automated vehicles, and consigned tens of thousands of Americans to needless deaths on our roadways. And it sounds hyperbolic when we say it, but it isn't. It's actually what the science and the data shows. And so, I'm always hopeful. I think that we've been fighting the good fight on this, and I think we have allies in this fight now. So again, we're going to hope to preserve the full 75. We're going to try to keep the 30 usable. But one of the questions that popped up in the Q&A was, what can we do? I think you need to reach out to the stakeholders and that can affect a decision right now. It's the FCC, it's your member of Congress. So pick up the phone, call your member of Congress and say, listen, I care about safety, and I care about, making sure that we minimize fatalities. And this is our best tool in the toolbox to do that. That's the way that we're going to move the needle on this. So yeah, I think I would say we're not done with this fight yet, but now's the time to be all in.
Thanks, Shaylin. One of the other questions that we received in the chat box was, what do we mean when we say that these applications are lost with a reduction in spectrum? And I'm just going to provide a high level answer to that. And basically, we've analyzed at ITS America, we analyzed a variety of V2X applications and the message types required to support those applications. And differing applications have differing spectrum needs based on the message type and the quantity of data and the frequency with the transmission for those communications. So what you ultimately get to is a point where either there isn't enough spectrum to communicate all the data that you need to communicate to fit all of those message types in, or you get to a point where you would suffer from harmful interference. So if we, at some point when you're trying to communicate too much information over a limited set of spectrum, it would cause interference, and the packets, the data wouldn't get adequately communicated. So that's kind of a very high level view, but it comes down to the types of message types that are needed to support these applications. Ken, I wanted to turn to you now to really talk about, I know that a lot of the infrastructure owner operators and V2X deployers across the country are trying to figure out how the FCC rulemaking impacts them specifically, particularly if they've already deployed V2X in the field. So how does the FCC's proposal impact those existing V2X deployments, and how is US DOT working with deployers and pilot sites in anticipation of the FCC's final report and order?
Okay, sure. That's a good question. And at this point, the report and order has not been published in the Federal Register. It's not been implemented. And so we're not working with deployers on making changes based on that report and order. We have a long history of things coming out of the FCC change between when we hear about them and what we see and when it gets published. So we don't know what the changes are going to be in a final report and order if it's ever published, and we've been watching for it. We're working with administration leadership across the department to understand what the implications and problems would be. You know, the challenge we have is what we know about the report and order so far is, you know, a little bit like the FCC's drilling holes in the bottom of the lifeboat right before it goes in the water. And so it has a lot of negative implications for states that have already deployed, you know, and for the potential we've talked about in the future. We don't know what the risk appetite will be for states that have already deployed to make further investments in changing. We don't know yet whether what the FCC has proposed will work. And so I wouldn't expect to see a rush of states or deployers making changes based on what we know about the report and order, you know, today, until we see the kinds of things we've seen, for example, with Dsrc. We've got wide scale deployments that we know work. We would need to see that with the 30 megahertz, with interference, with the way the cellular V2X technology operates. Will it be effective? Will it have the collision avoidance benefits? We're testing. We purchased 250 cellular V2X devices, which was in itself a big challenge, and we're in the midst of testing those for interference. And so, of course, it also matters in the real world what happens under this report and order, not just what the modeling says.
Thanks, Ken. And I think, you know, I think one of the things that we all agree on in this panel is the importance of V2X technologies and the importance of the 5.9 gigahertz spectrum band for deploying V2X. And really all of us have said, you know, commented on the need for the full 75 megahertz. Yeah, looking forward, and I think we all, you know, are hopeful that the FCC won't reallocate the lower 45 megahertz. But looking forward and you know, preparing for a scenario in which V2X does only have 30 megahertz after the expected report and order is published. And I would note the report and order will provide access to indoor unlicensed devices to that lower 45 megahertz immediately upon the effective date. Although it would push outdoor unlicensed devices to a later date as the subject of the further notice of proposed rulemaking. And we know there are likely to be a few other items in that further notice of proposed rulemaking, including issues related to reimbursement for incumbent licensees, power limits and interference issues surrounding outdoor unlicensed use in the future, and then also whether or not the FCC needs to identify different spectrum outside of the 5.9 gigahertz band specifically for V2X technologies. So in kind of thinking about this future environment and what the FCC needs to do going forward, how or what are some of the things that the panelists on this panel are going to call for in response to that further notice of proposed rulemaking? For instance, to protect the 30 megahertz from harmful interference, or to reimburse existing deployments and the like. And I'm going to go to Sue first on this. What do we need to see from the FCC? You know, apart from not reallocating the lower 45, what do we need to see from them to really have a chance to deploy V2X in the upper 30?
Well, I think along with Ken's comments, both OEMs, including Honda, has made a significant investment in the current technology and the current spectrum. And to move it to somewhere else would incur a significant additional cost. And the existing devices are functioning well. There's nothing wrong with it. So even internally, it's hard to explain why are we making changes of something working to move to something else. And I think the state DOT, including Ohio DOT, is probably facing the same challenges, additional cost of moving to a different spectrum, potentially different technology, for really lack of a good reason to do so. So I hope the delay of FCC's posting their final decision on the Federal Registry may have some hesitation in there. And I think we probably should focus more on how do we fight against it, continue the fighting instead of trying to think of what if we lose. Because I think NHTSA also did an interference study. The upper 30, there will be interference from both sides to make it very vulnerable for safety applications.
Thank you, and that's an important perspective to have, Sue. And I think certainly, I think all of us believe that the full 5.9 should be preserved for transportation communications, and are hoping that that does occur. And Jim, I do want to go to you though, and thinking about some of these issues, and particularly, I think if you could speak to the interference concerns, because I know there are ongoing and significant interference concerns for that upper 30 megahertz.
That's right. Let me, on the journey of this, actually, I'll invoke some important background information. Is that an industry consortium, many of you know CAMP. We at Qualcomm, for a particular CAMP endeavor, were actually part of the governing structure because we, working with allies in CAMP, as others in CAMP, have measured and have actually, CAMP members have actually shown to FCC some of the objective issues with regard to interference. That is, we as a group of companies have taken C-V2X transceivers, put them near unlicensed Wi-Fi in the Uni 4 band with the emission limits that were proposed, put them in an outdoor access point configuration. I invite you to look at that. The news isn't that great, but let's not say that the sky is falling. There are certain things that could be done, and certainly invite all organizations to look at that. Again and again, focusing on the fact that our investments primarily, when you look at the potential, particularly, are on the applications of the protocols that would work on either radio technology. So let's see what we could do with the 30 megahertz we have, protect that spectrum, and all the while go after the full 75 megahertz. So again, there are issues. We'll understand them 30 days after the publication of the FNPRM, because we anticipate the technical rules, which would have out-of-band emissions for our devices vis-a-vis the devices of unlicensed Wi-Fi will be given to us. We'll understand that landscape and some of the interference effects a little bit better.
Thank you, Jim. And recognizing that we have, I think, 2 minutes left for our panel, I do want to just provide a final opportunity, Shaylin and Ken, for you to give any final thoughts or direction in terms of how should the transportation stakeholder industry look at this, and what are the next steps? What should we be prepared for, and what do we need to be thinking about now? And I'll start with Ken, and then we'll wrap up the panel with Shaylin.
Well, Tim, thanks, and I'll try and do this in a minute, so Shaylin's got the last minute. But okay, the path forward. What do we have to do? We have to decide on what the priority mission is. Do we want to save lives, or do we want to stream entertainment? Once we make that decision, and it appears the FCC has made that decision and we're trying to reverse it, if we reverse it, we have to complete the homework. We have to know that we have a system that works. We have to recoalesce the stakeholder communities around a single solution, and then we have to act and deploy that technology solution. In the 5 years since we proposed a solution and it sat idle, 30 million crashes have occurred, 15 million people have been injured, and over 200,000 or approaching 200,000 people have died because we do not have a solution that's effective technically. But it's not just a technical decision. It's an affordability question. It's a national availability, international availability question. It's an efficiency question, and it's the interoperability. And I think in this administration, there's a desire to move forward with things that reflect safety of life, address climate change, economic recovery, and American global standing. So I think there's a path forward, and I hope that we can get on that path and make progress. So I'll turn it over to Shaylin.
Thanks, Ken. And I'm just appreciate the perspectives of Ken and Sue and Jim. And, you know, I think that I think we all get the data and the statistics. I just feel like we're fighting for the right thing here. We're fighting for safety. We're fighting for a better environment. We're fighting for, you know, greater equity. And, you know, when I was a kid growing up, I was always taught to fight for what I believed in. And I feel like I've been trying to do that. And I think that that's what this fight represents. And so we're going to continue to fight to carry this message out with the safety organizations and with anybody else who wants to join. And we're going to take it to people who clearly don't want to hear that this is the right tool at the right time to save lives, to reduce emissions, and to increase equity. And whether we end up with the 75 or we end up with 30, we're going to continue to fight because we believe that we're doing the right thing. So I'm just really grateful for everybody who has joined us in this. And if you have ideas, we're open to them.
Thank you, Shaylin, and thank you, Ken, Jim, and Sue, for the very thoughtful conversation today. And we really appreciate all of your efforts in the search to deploy V2X technologies and increase the safety of our transportation system. So thank you for joining us today.